Ruler School is brought to you by Happy Little Hug Factory and these amazing patrons. Extra special thank you to guest lecturer patrons Brody Harris and Lance Albertson. Thank you for your support. Enjoy the video.
Welcome back to the Tournament Report with yours truly, Paul Reissmann, and today we are going to be talking about the WGPQ in Orlando, Florida this past weekend. Of course, if you like these tournament reports, feature matches, deck profiles, and the weekly Ruler School Teachers Lounge podcast, make sure you hit subscribe and the bell so that way you are notified whenever any of those videos are live and ready for you to watch. And of course, at the end of the video, if you like this video, well, hit like or hit dislike, whatever you wish, and then let us know down in the comments below any of the answers that you have for the question at the end of the video. So make sure you stick around for that. But of course, it wouldn't be a tournament report without a ruler breakdown. So there were 47 players that were at the GP in Orlando. 14 of those players were playing Time Spinning Witch. There were 8 Chimimis, 5 Hanzos, 5 Keurig, 3 Lucifer, 2 Ayu, 2 Imel, and then about 8 other rulers, including an Arcana of War, one of the draft rulers. I've seen that list in itself, and it's very interesting, but of course, secrets, so I can't share that list, unfortunately, today. But this is a pretty standard breakdown for most GPs. And of course, as we move into the top deck lists, you can probably expect that, Time Spinning Witch won the tournament, right? I mean, it's the best deck. There might be some Chimimis as well. There might be some other rulers. And why is Hanzo even present at the GP? It seems a little odd that some people just decided, Hanzo's my favorite ruler, I should just play it. Seems pretty odd, right? Everything on the surface looks pretty regular, but Hanzo actually won the GP. And congratulations to Ryan Miles for winning the GP with such a different ruler. A ruler I'd honestly discounted entirely because honestly, when people ask me, what list should I be playing right now if I'm new to the game, I usually say something like Chimimi, or if you have a different ruler that you like in one of the sets, Lucifer would also be a really good choice. But you can just kind of discount Hanzo if you pick up the green deck. And honestly, that's the way I believed up until, well, this GP. Because Hanzo won the entire event, which is really unexpected. And why there were so many Hanzos to begin with is people started picking up on the fact that Hanzo has maybe got something going for it. Well, what is that something? Well, we're going to try and figure that out for you today. And we're going to be looking at the list on a more molecular level, so that way you guys can see the different cards and how they're being used and why they are working the way they are. So let's just start right into this. So if you're going to be playing Hanzo, you might be playing one of his main support cards from New Dawn Rises, Kotaro, Ninja of the Wind. Now, Kotaro is very interesting because he's kind of an echo of the old school Featsing card that we got way back in Grim Cluster, and kind of what we just left in Lapis Cluster as well with Melfi. So Kotaro is kind of like one of those spiritual successors to these cards, because he comes in, has quick cast, comes in with an enter ability, and can produce any will of any attribute for the most part. But what's interesting about Kotaro is not only is he a little bit stronger than Melfi, a little bit weaker than Feasting, his will can only be used to be played with chance. Now, if you have things like Fair's Spell or a Winds of Vitality, you can use those cards with whatever you produce. Kotaro is very useful for that. So this is kind of filtering into the able to use every different kind of will, every different kind of trick, but not really the master of any of them, because you can only use them with chance. So you're not going to see a Kotaro come in, produce some green will, and then you're immediately casting a Lorite. That's not really something that's going to happen. But it's still useful nonetheless. I mean, it's a 6/6 body that's on curve for most 2-drops. You're in green, which is pretty standard if you're going to be running Hanzo. And then, of course, you have all these different kinds of will, which means that you can splash in really a lot of different kinds of cards if you wish, although some cards may be more useful than others. Regardless, you can produce will of any kind, and you can spend it only on chance. What needs to be said is that most of these resonators are going to have quick cast, and if you play those resonators on your opponent's turn, they kind of basically have swiftness as well, because you play them on your opponent's turn, comes to your turn, their summoning sickness is gone, and they can attack. So you're going to be seeing cards like this kind of pop up as a result of these Resonators having Quick Cast. But we're going to keep moving on here. And we're going to be talking about CL, Sorceress Priestess. Now, when most people think of CL, they probably think of the Ruler, which is something you probably don't really want to run right now because auras are not the best kinds of cards. However, this Resonator is actually pretty good. This is also kind of a spiritual successor to Feasting in the sense that it produces will of any color, and it has an alternative effect, and it's also Quick Cast and Elf, etc. Now, CL is actually in the lore the ancestor of Feasting, so it's kind of interesting that you can see this through line with the card design coming into play here, and I think it's really kind of cool. With that being said, it's a 5/6, 3-drop Elf Resonator with Quick Cast, enters the field, produces 2 wills of any attribute, really similar to Kotaro, except you produce 2 of any will that you want. What does that mean? It means you can produce red and green. It means you can produce white and black. It means you can produce blue and red. It means you can do whatever you want, any combination of 2 wills. You can float double green if you want. You can float double black. It doesn't really matter. One of the things you're going to be doing in this deck, though, is you're going to be playing this card, and sometimes you're going to be doing green and black for a very particular card coming up. And of course, if you find yourself in a position where you're playing Winds of Vitality on this card to get in some damage, you're going to be getting a +8/+8 instead of a +6/+6 because of that secondary effect. That's pretty useful. It's kind of interesting. And of course, if you're playing any win chance from your rune deck, that also counts. So that's really interesting to me. I think CL is actually a pretty decent card. We just never really saw play, mostly because there were just better alternatives at the time. But a lot of those have either been rotated or they didn't fit into the style of the deck at all. So seeing CL in this is pretty cool. It's a Quick Cast Resonator just like Kotaro. So it's going to be really interesting to see where this card comes into play with the deck. And then, of course, probably the best Quick Cast Resonator in the deck is going to be Karura the Crow Tengu. Try saying that 5 times fast. It's really difficult. I've tried. But what's really cool about this Yokai Resonator is that it has Quick Cast, Flying, Barrier, Chant, which means it doesn't get affected by chance at all. Resonator effects still apply, so keep that in mind. And when the card is on the chase to be put into the field, it can't be canceled. So Favor Spell can't cancel it. Other kinds of cards can't cancel this. The only card that can really get rid of this card when it's still on the chase is Winds of Salvation. And of course, there's a big difference about that. And spoiler alert, Winds of Salvation is in this deck, so we will be going in depth on why that card is so particular for you newer players who need to understand how the chase works and how canceling works, things like that. But this card is relatively decent. It's a 12/12 flyer. It has Quick Cast and Flying. It's really hard to get rid of for the most part, unless you have like a board wipe effect or you even have something, say, like a monster effect to get rid of it. For the most part, it's going to be sticking around. Pretty much a boss monster for the deck. It's very, very strong. So we're going to be moving on to the runes now. Those are the 3 main Quick Cast Resonators you're going to be seeing. We didn't include Viola because Viola is pretty much a solid staple in most green decks at this point. But the runes here, Sealing Scroll is the reason you run Hanzo. It's his master rune. You can only use it if you have Hanzo. And Sealing Scroll is really strong because it stops your opponent's rune from being played, essentially. It cancels their rune on the chase, which is really powerful. Then, of course, you have Forest Meditation for the really neat combo you have with Spirit Stones. You tap your Spirit Stones to produce Green Will. You sack them through their own effect to draw cards, and then you play Forest Meditation for free, essentially, because you've floated the 2 will. You're going to bring those stones back and draw a card, and then those stones come back recovered. So essentially, you draw 3 cards for free, which is kind of nice if you're running low on cards and you need stuff in your hand. You need more Quick Cast Resonators, etc. So it's really good. And on top of that, you have Rapid Fire Me, which is going to go really well with Sandstorm. It's going to be dealing 600 damage to the entire field, all for 1 will, essentially, which is really, really good, especially if you're going against something, say, like Chimimi, who has a lot of low-costed Resonators that all kind of round out around 600, 700 defense, which is really, really good. Unless, of course, you have like a bunch of damage in your rune deck. So keep that in mind. Rapid Fire Me and Sandstorm is a very powerful combination. In addition to that, we have the chants. Now, of course, you have Ruin Story, which is, hey, look at that. It's green and it's black. So if you're playing a CL and you play a Ruin Story, then not only do you have a Resonator, you've either gotten rid of their Resonator, of their choice, of course, because they get to choose what Resonator is banished. You can bring something back from your graveyard into your hand, or you can even make them pay an additional will to cast any chant that they are trying to play. Which, if they can't do that, you can just straight up cancel whatever spell they're trying to put on the chase, which is pretty nice. Winds of Vitality is a staple in most green decks at this point. And then, of course, we have the two main counterspells in the game right now, Winds of Salvation and Feyre's Spell. And the thing you're going to notice about these, and I call them cancel spells, although Winds of Salvation technically doesn't cancel anything, the main difference for newer players, if you're new to the game and you don't know the difference, canceling means it's just removed from the chase, it's canceled. And then Winds of Salvation just straight up takes the target spell from the chase and removes it from the chase altogether. So it doesn't cancel the card, it just moves the card from the chase elsewhere and just removes it from the game altogether. And so that's why Winds of Salvation is one of the only answers to things like Gil Lapis, Inheritor of the Stars, or Karura, because Winds of Salvation removes the target spell from the game, whereas Feyre's Spell just cancels the target spell on the chase. So that's an important distinction to make, especially if you're newer to the game. Those two things are not the same thing, so just keep that in mind. It's really important rule stuff. And then, of course, the last remaining support stuff that we have are, of course, Lorite, because if you're playing a green deck, you're probably playing Lorite. Fairy of the Lost Isles, which is the only non-quick cast Resonator in the deck itself. It basically functions as a Tama, whereas it's a 4/4 with flying, and then if your opponent is targeting it, you can just pay a green and remove it to draw a card. So it's a really good way of getting around some of your opponent's stuff. It doesn't deal damage, but it does draw you a card, which is nice. It's a good replacement. On top of that, you have Jupiter, and Jupiter is another really good 5-drop quick cast Resonator, because he's not Karura by any means. He doesn't have that flying, he doesn't have that barrier chant, but what's really good about Jupiter is that he can cancel a target spell, he can bounce something, he can recover something, or he can just straight up just draw you a card, and you get to pick 2 modes. So he's multimodal, he's very, very good, and then of course he has some decent stats to go alongside that. So Jupiter in the sideboard is a very good Resonator to support this kind of deck. And on the screen right now is Ryan Miles' winning list, and you're going to see most of the stuff, including the Viola that we didn't talk about, included in the list. And of course he's got a couple of black tiers here to help him get rid of any pesky 1-drop or lower Resonators. And of course he's playing Speaking Stone, so he has access to these black cards that are story chants, and including Ruin Story, which is a story chant, so you get to float Black Will for that using Speaking Stone. In his sideboard, he has pretty much anti-aggro everything, including Agony of Despair. Scarlet's Agony. Agony of Despair is not even relatively close. Excuse me. And of course, he has Arrow Trap as well. More black tiers, Winds of Salvation for additional just removal in general. And then Elemental Blast, which is probably the best way of removing anything in the game if you're playing green right now. Specifically green, because this is the one spell that has like direct damage associated with it on one Resonator, and it's really, really good. It's basically, if you torrent, you essentially do a burst breath on it for 700 damage, which is pretty good. So congratulations again to Ryan Miles for getting first place. This is a really cool deck, really different. I know Jeremy played it at his locals recently and really liked the deck, and you might even be seeing that on the channel, so definitely keep an eye out for that. You'll be able to see this deck in action. Next up, we have Kirik Rarik, a classic ruler from the Rhea cluster beginnings, and of course Kirik is one of the classic aggro rulers that we have seen time and time again coming into the format and just tearing things up with all of his Dragonoid pride. I'm a huge fan of Kirik and Shayla, but Kirik is definitely a close second, and that's mostly because he has strength counters and he can use those to draw additional cards using his front side effect. And of course, if you flip him, you get additional counters that you can use to burn your opponent's Resonators, including J Resonators, which is really cool. And then of course, Blood of the Dragon God, +10/+10, put a dragon from the top 7 cards into the field. Love this ruler. All of the flavor for this ruler. I love this ruler. I'm glad that he actually did some decent stuff at GP Orlando. Now, Keurig has done some interesting things in the last several months, which is one of those things is just not show up at all. Very few Keurigs have been placing at all up until now. That being said, Keurig does this strange thing in the metagame where he's around for a long time, he goes away for a little bit, but then he comes back with a vengeance. And we kind of saw this as a part of the Rhea cluster only format that was happening in Europe, where a bunch of people played things like Ayu and Tigris, and then all of a sudden you see Keurig being played again. And one of the main hallmarks of those decks was of course the Null Magic Stone, giving him access to black, things like Ray the Black Owl, etc. Some really good single drop black chants do exist in the format. And they do have some benefits to Keurig as a ruler in general. Of course, some people who are newer to the game are going to see that, like, oh, I'm going to take 200 damage just to produce red. That doesn't seem like it's worth it. But you have to keep a couple things in mind. One, 200 damage over the course of a game may make the difference, or it may not. In general, you want to be proactive. Dealing damage to yourself to forward your board state might actually help you. And two, there are actually cards in the game, one specifically that is in this deck. There's actually cards in the game where if you deal damage to yourself, you actually get some benefits. So just keep that in mind. Null Magic Stone is probably one of the better of the dual stones that we have in the current format, because it automatically gives you the second color without much setback. Whereas I would think the worst stone is probably the inverse stone, where you have to flip your J ruler, flip into your J ruler in order to get access to your black instead of just your white. So Null Magic Stone, in my opinion, is one of the better magic stones right now. And just keep that in mind as we go forward. Null Magic Stone might actually see more play in other kinds of decks. Especially if you're a fan of Isis or even Fuxi, the Null Magic Stone might become part of your main list in general. So just keep this card in mind. It's very, very useful for you. Going forward, the main cards that Keurig still uses are Howell Pig, Paeli, Piggy, and Ultra Dragon. All of these cards are very, very useful. Howell Pig allows Keurig to tap for his own strength counters and come back as a recovered as a recovered ruler, excuse me, and then be able to tap for a stone so you don't miss a beat. But then of course, Paeli and Piggy give you additional strength counters, and they have attached effects to help you be more aggressive. And Ultra Dragon is probably one of the best resonators in the game, period. So Ultra Dragon is very, very good. It's a flyer. It's one of the other win conditions in the deck itself. And Keurig, for that reason, I think is still really, really strong, and that's probably why he's been decent in the GP so far. But in addition to that, with the Null Magic Stone, he has access to things like Majin Dark Elf and Ray the Black Owl. So Majin Dark Elf, if you deal damage to yourself, and if you're new, keep that in mind. If you deal damage to yourself, you can then play Majin Dark Elf, which has 6/6 swiftness, and it's only a 1-drop. So you're able to use Majin Dark Elf as a result of having access to Null Magic Stone, which is really good for most red decks. In addition, Ray the Black Owl and Howell Pig squatted in the sideboard allows you to get around some of the control decks that we're seeing in the format right now, in addition to kind of dealing with some other aggressive decks like Chimimi by suiciding into their stuff, producing additional resonators like your Howell Pigs or even your Piggies, and being able to pick off resonators with your 800 body. Decent card. It's a way of getting around some of the resonators that your opponent is not going to tap in order to be able to block your stuff. And this is a way of getting around that stuff, and it's really good. The other card that we need to talk about is Welser, the old man Welser that has the God Art to flash himself in. And he copies all of your chants, so he's really good for a lot of reasons. Notwithstanding, you can produce additional copies of all your battle arts, which are right here. So you still have Heaven Sundering Dragon Palm, Ground Inner Supremacy, Play Dead, and High Speed. If you end up having a second Ground Inner Supremacy bringing out 2 Paelis, that's really solid in my opinion, but that's also a little greedy. So let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Ground Inner Supremacy is probably Keurig's best turn 1 play, because you bring out a Paeli for basically 3 strength counters, and in exchange you get a 2-drop 9/9 at the end of the day. So keep that in mind. Grounded Supremacy is still a very powerful card. It's very good in red. And then High Speed, Heaven Sending Dragon Palm are your damage dealers, and they give additional damage to your Resonators by giving it +2/+2 and Swiftness, and then Play Dead makes sure that all your Resonators stay on the board. Other cards you get access to as a result of running the Nullstone are Black Tears, Spider's Web, Evil Elemental Uprising, all of which are really good anti-meta cards because, well, they come from the time when Scheherazade ruled the format. And then, of course, the Path We Part is a very strong tool for Keurig to use because you can either bounce something or deal 600 damage to something, all for 1 red will. And you lose the blue will if you have a Keurig, so it's basically a 1-drop. And that's really, really good. It's a really good source of removal, and it's also a good way of making sure that your attacks get through. With that being said, here is Jake's second place victory with the Keurig. Keurig ultimately beat out all of the different Time Spinning Witch matchups that it played against for the most part. As far as I can see, this deck got very far, and honestly, I didn't think this deck had much wind left in it, but it's clear. This is not the only Keurig list in the top 8, but Keurig is still very much a ruler that you need to watch out for. Most of the cards that you're seeing on the screen right now, we've basically gone over, with the exception, I think, of this Cross Counter, which is just a way of preventing damage, and this Ferocious Spike. I'm probably butchering that name, but in general, it just means to close out the game. It does about 1200 damage to pretty much anything on board or at your opponent in general. So congratulations to Jake for getting second place. Keurig, still very good, so if you like Keurig, play it. It's still a very strong Resonator. It's a relatively cheap deck to construct as well, so check that out. Moving on to third place, we have Joseph's Chimimi list. This is a pretty standard green aggressive deck, wherein you still run Speaking Stone, so you have things like Ruined Story, Evil Elemental Uprising, and Black Tears in your sideboard. And of course, you have things like Rapid Fire Me and Sandstorm in your Rune deck, which is really the main use of running Chimimi and Hanzo. You get access to runes that deal a lot of damage. And then, of course, you have the Pygmy Hippos and the Fairies, Violas, and other cards that come together to make Chimimi just a really good aggro deck that is also kind of a mid-range deck, and it can kind of control the board. Chimimi has a lot of flexibility, and so if you're still looking at Chimimi as a ruler that you want to run, I would highly recommend it. I mean, it's still got third place, and it's still a decent ruler, but you're going to have to watch out for Keurig in addition to Time Spinning Witch and Hanzo now. So keep your eye on that. We had 2 more Keurig lists make the top. These lists don't differ too much, although there is some differences in card choices. As you can see in Gerardo's deck, there are a couple Freylas, and he mains 2 Ray the Black Owls, which is okay, and then he also sides 3 Glint of Insight. And Glint of Insight is a very solid card to use against things like Time Spinning Witch to get rid of the stuff in their hand that can stop your plays. So I really like that. But in addition to this, you're going to see Steven is running things like Burst Breath to deal 700 damage to a Resonator, a J Resonator, a J Resonator, or even 700 damage to your opponent. In addition to that, he's sideboarding his Ultra Dragons, and I think that's mostly because he wants to be able to run his main damage dealing spell in the main board, and he also runs the Taoist. You're going to see the Taoist on the board, on the screen, rather, in just a moment here, because the Taoist is a very interesting Resonator in general, and of course you run his Tiger in the sideboard as well to give him to give it flying, and it's a really decent 1-drop Resonator, so in case you don't want to run the Howell Pig, you can run the Tiger and deal some additional damage early on in the game. And then from here on out, we're going to be talking about Time Spinning Witch, which is not that much different than what we've seen in the past. I mean, the stone lineup is relatively the same. You're still seeing Dino Riders, you're still seeing Mosasaurus and Dinosaur Surfacing, but the main difference you're going to see in a couple of these lists is the inclusion of black cards, namely Glint of Insight, because it's really good in the mirror match to just be able to call out, say, Farah's spell and just go crazy with all your different stuff. The inclusion of a couple Rachels in the main board is also really good. In addition to that, you're going to see that Delaney is actually running a Blazer to get the upper hand on your opponent, and then it's really good to have precision on your side of the field at some point too, because if your opponent is not attacking, you can start picking off their Resonators and making them answer it, and it's really hard to get rid of Blazer, because he can just remove his +1/+1 counter, give himself barrier, or just remove something from battle, and it's really good for that reason. And then, of course, good old Brandan Bremont in his Time Spinning Witch. And again, it's 3 Glint of Insight, a second Dino Rider, which is becoming more staple, and we're going down to 3 Mosasaurus because you really don't need 4, I guess is the mentality. I've kind of seen myself needing 4 in my own lists before, and that's because sometimes I've drawn into them, but that could also be the reason why he decided to not run 4, because if you draw into a Mosasaurus, it's kind of annoying to draw into them. But he's running 2 Dino Riders as a way of dealing with Chimimis and Kurix as well, and any other lists that come up that have a lot of really small resonators that can be, removed from the board for 600 damage itself. So now we're moving on to the next part of the video, which is probably one of my favorite parts of the videos that I do, and that's giving you my thoughts about the metagame, the state of the game in general, where things are going, whatever you want to call it. And of course, these are just my opinions, but I would love to know your insights down in the comment section down below. So make sure that you go down there, and while you're down there, hit like if you like the video, and just give me your thoughts. If you agree or disagree, just give me some ideas. But the way that I see the main top tier decks going right now, and of course this has been shifting all throughout the latest season. At one point, Gil the Gifted Conjurer was up here. Now he's not even here at all. Time Spinning Witch is clearly still the best deck. And I have to say that because Distortion of Time and Lorite have become their own memes, so she has the power of memedom on her side, and that's really hard to shake. But in general, and in all seriousness, the things that she is able to do as a ruler, as a deck in itself, they're really powerful, really interesting things. The ability to lock down your opponent's stones, the ability to stop your opponent from recovering, incremental damage over the course of a game. It's a fun deck to play, but frankly, it's really frustrating when your stones get frozen. And for that reason, I think Time Spinning Witch is still the best deck. Even though it didn't win this GP, Time Spinning Witch in general is still just a deck you have to watch out for. Now, is it unbeatable? Of course not. I've seen Chimimi, as well as Kirik, do some very interesting things against her, and they're heavy aggro. In fact, Chimimi sort of blurs the line between what is aggressive and what is control, because she's more mid-range, and she can flow between those relatively easily. And you're going to say, well, Paul, Hanzo is in the lower tiers of the top tier. Why is that? I mean, it just won the GP. And the reason I'll say that is because if you haven't played a deck like Hanzo in the past, it might seem odd to you if you try and play it now. Most of the time, you're going to be calling stone, passing, very similar to how you would play Scheherazade, because you want to play everything on your opponent's turn. You want to disrupt their plays. That's what Hanzo's big thing is. And for that reason, if you're not used to that kind of playstyle, Hanzo is going to be, well, a weird fit in general. So that's why I put him in the lower tier, although I still think he's very, very, very good. But Lucifer is also inching ever closer to doing some very interesting things. Lucifer is a very strong J ruler that just hasn't managed to crack in quite yet. And I think Lucifer is one of those rulers you're going to have to keep your eye on, especially if Lorite or Distortion of Time leaves, and suddenly we have this opening in which Time Spinning Witch sort of falls back a little bit, green decks fall back a little bit. Lucifer might take the top spot as a good mid-range control deck with really strong resonators and the ability to pick your field and your hand apart. Lucifer has a lot of really, really good tools. In addition to that, of course, since Kirik has access to Null Stone, every black ruler also has access to that stone as well. So who knows? We might even see Lucifer evolve into a more black-red variant in the future, depending on what the metagame calls for. So Lucifer in itself has a lot of potential. It's not quite making it yet, but I think it's something you need to keep your eye on in going into the future. This is sort of how the B tier is shaping up to look for me. Gil definitely has fallen from grace a little bit. It's not exactly super powerful. It's not as flexible as the Time Spinning Witch. It has some issues against aggro. So I can see Gil sort of falling neatly into this ranking a little bit. And of course, Ayu is also a very good ruler. If you're really good with Ayu, and if you want to get really good at the deck, it wouldn't be a bad idea to continue to play Ayu. All things considered, it's got a lot of tools. So I think it's still B tier, and it's kind of aggressive, and it can kind of swing games out of nowhere. So you got to be careful of what Ayu can do, and she's always going to be a deck that you have to take into consideration. But what's really interesting is we're not seeing a lot of Brunhild, and we're not seeing a lot of Tigris, or we're definitely seeing Imol, but we're not seeing Tigris or Brunhild, and I'm kind of surprised by that. Not because I think these decks should be better than they are, but Tigris in itself is just kind of a decent, aggressive white ruler, kind of next to Brunhild as well. I mean, Brunhild is a 12/12 flyer that brings something back. That is not a small flip at all. For 4, you get a ton of different stuff, including access to runes. And so I'm seeing Tigris and Brunhild potentially moving up and maybe doing something as soon as we get more support. But these rulers kind of have the potential to move up into the A tier, but this is kind of where they're at right now because I'm just not seeing them do anything. And of course, because I love machines, I have to talk about them, and I know a lot of you also love machines, but I'm seeing machines do squat, like they're just not doing anything. But I do think with the recent spoilers that we have for blue, that machines might have the push that they need to potentially move even into the B tier. So keep in mind, if we see things like Distortion of Time and Lorite leave, Lorite being one of the main things against Lancelot right now, being able to have an enter effect that gets canceled by Lorite, suddenly you don't have the ability to blow up the board anymore. That's kind of unfortunate. But if we see Lorite leave, who knows, machines might actually start doing something, especially if they get a decent win condition outside of Lancelot and Gawain. Lancelot in itself is not necessarily a win condition, it's a way of destroying your opponent's tempo, and Gawain is a way of putting tempo on board for yourself, but it can get removed by anything that black is running. It also just loses to miscalculation, let's just be honest there. So Gawain is really great, but it's very one note and it's just very aggressive, and we need something that has a little bit more staying power in my opinion. So I can see machines going forward potentially being really good. Who knows? We haven't seen any of the stuff really for machines coming through yet. I mean, who knows? There might be a super rare for machines coming out, because we definitely saw a super rare coming out for Loki. I don't know what to expect at this point, but some of the early support that I've seen for machines looks promising, and I'm hoping it's a deck that actually starts doing something in the future. With that being said, what's your opinion? What spoilers are you the most hyped for? I definitely am, as you can probably tell, very hype for the machine stuff that is coming out right now. Things that sort of are pointing toward Guinevere as a character coming out. Maybe she's a new win condition that we can use. I don't know. I don't know if she's going to be a super rare or even just like an uncommon with some decent stats. I don't know what she looks like. I also don't know what else is coming out for her, but I'm very excited for the stuff that we've seen so far. The resonators and the removal spells that we're seeing for blue are really, really good. That being said, I'm also really interested in what green has to offer, because it seems like Hanzo, with its recent success, might be getting even stronger. Who knows? That new 1-drop master room with green, it doesn't seem overpowered, but it does seem like a nice little utility to have in the background, maybe even in your side deck. Who knows? But what do you think? What spoilers are you most interested in? Are you interested in potential Lucifer stuff? Maybe even Lich getting good? Isis? Let me know down in the comment section down below. And of course, while you're down there, hit that like button, or even hit that dislike button, especially if you hate all the times I've screwed up in this video with my audio so far. Let me know down in the comment section down below. Hit like or dislike, hit subscribe and the bell for more videos like this. Definitely check out our deck profiles and our feature matches that come out every single week, and the Teachers Lounge podcast that comes out 9 p.m. EST every Monday evening. This has been Paul. Have a great day.